Hey guys, tonight we begin with something brutal, brilliant, and absolutely unforgiving: life in the Roman Empire. Not as Marcus Aurelius contemplating philosophy in his tent, not as a wealthy senator lounging in marble baths, but as you, just you, dropped unprepared into a world where lead pipes poison your water, gladiators die for entertainment, and your morning toilet routine involves sharing a communal sponge with strangers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to the sounds of yelling, crying babies, and what might be a chicken arguing with a drunk man about turnip prices. Congratulations. You've just woken up in a Roman insula, the ancient world's version of a crowded apartment building. Think of it as a vertical slum held together by hope, spit, and some very questionable engineering decisions. You're probably living on the third or fourth floor, which means you're poor. The higher up you go, the cheaper the rent, and the more likely your ceiling collapses when someone upstairs decides to rearrange their furniture or accidentally drops a chamber pot. Your room is barely larger than a closet. Stone walls that weep moisture in winter and crack like eggs in summer. There's a hole in the wall that generously calls itself a window, though it's really just an opening for smoke, rain, and the occasional confused pigeon to wander through. Your bed, if you want to call it that, is a straw mattress stuffed with whatever you could find. Hay, old rags, and probably a few insects who've claimed squatters' rights. The blanket smells like wet sheep and disappointment. There's no furniture, no decorations, certainly no kitchen, because cooking inside is forbidden. One small fire could turn the entire building into a Roman barbecue, and fire safety regulations won't be invented for another 2,000 years. Your possessions fit in a single basket: a clay cup with a crack in it, a tunic that's seen better decades, and maybe a wooden comb if you're feeling optimistic about personal hygiene. And the walls? Paper thin. You know intimate details about your neighbors' lives, their arguments, their prayers, their digestive issues, and their nighttime activities. Privacy is a luxury you can't afford, and even if you could, the architecture wouldn't allow it. The air in your room is thick with smoke, mildew, and the distinctive aroma of humanity living too close together. Someone's baking bread downstairs, but you weren't invited. Street vendors are already hawking their wares, shouting prices for figs and fish sauce. A centurion is barking orders at someone who's probably bleeding. You're not even out the door yet, and you're already sweating, itchy, and possibly inhaling lead dust from the pipes that bring water to the lucky few who can afford plumbing. Welcome to your Roman morning. You're not Caesar. You're not even close to being a gladiator. You're just another soul trying to survive another day in the greatest empire the world has ever known, and you still have 23 hours and 59 minutes to go. Now that you've survived climbing down the rickety stairs of your insula without falling through a rotten board, it's time to address the morning's most urgent biological imperative. And no, there's no bathroom in your apartment. No sink, no running water, no flush mechanism, not even a bucket with any pretense of dignity. Instead, you grab your chamber pot, whatever shreds of modesty you can muster, and shuffle toward the nearest public latrina. The Roman public toilet isn't just a bathroom. It's a social institution, a networking opportunity, and a test of your ability to maintain eye contact during deeply personal moments. You arrive at a long stone bench with holes carved into it, positioned over a shallow channel of running water. The Romans, masters of engineering, designed this system to carry waste away from the city. What they didn't engineer was personal space or individual stalls. You sit down, assuming there's an available spot, right next to a complete stranger who might want to discuss politics, the weather, or his opinions about gladiator fighting techniques. There are no doors, no partitions, no barriers between you and the person across from you who's eating breakfast while conducting their business. This is Roman efficiency at its finest. Why waste time with separate activities when you can multitask? The conversation flows as freely as the water beneath you. A retired legionnaire complains about his sciatica. A merchant discusses grain prices. A baker argues about bread quality. Meanwhile, you're trying to focus on the task at hand while someone 3 seats down is practicing rhetoric for an upcoming court case. Privacy, as a concept, simply doesn't exist. And then comes the real adventure: cleaning up. The Romans have provided a communal sponge attached to a stick, soaked in a bucket of vinegar or salt water. This is the Tesorium, and it's shared by everyone. The same sponge that just cleaned your neighbor is now being offered to you with a smile and a friendly nod. You can rinse it in the bucket first, of course, but the vinegar has seen things, terrible things, and it's not entirely convinced it wants to cooperate. If you're wealthy enough to bring your own cloth or moss, congratulations on your foresight and disposable income. If not, you use what everyone else uses and try not to think about the implications. And don't even consider doing your business in an alley. Public urination laws are real, fines are substantial, and Roman law enforcement doesn't issue warnings. They issue beatings. When you're finished, you wash your hands in the communal basin. Well, wash might be too generous a term. You rinse them in water that's been touched by more fingers than a Roman census. There's no soap, because soap hasn't been properly invented yet. Just water, hope, and a prayer to whichever god handles hygiene emergencies. You leave the latrina feeling lighter in body but heavier in spirit. You've survived the morning toilet experience, which means you're already ahead of many tourists who would have fled screaming at the first sight of the communal sponge. But this is Rome, and the day is just beginning. Having successfully navigated the social complexities of Roman bathroom etiquette, you're probably feeling hungry. After all, it's morning, the sun is rising over the 7 hills, and surely the greatest empire in history can provide a decent breakfast. Prepare for disappointment on a scale that would make a modern airport food court look like a Michelin-starred restaurant. Welcome to the Roman Gentaculum, the morning meal that consists of whatever you can find that won't actively kill you. Forget about coffee. The Romans had never heard of it. No tea, no orange juice, no anything that might wake you up or provide comfort. Your breakfast options are essentially bread and watered-down wine, possibly with a side of mild despair. The bread is panis rusticus, a dense, chewy substance that doubles as construction material. It's made from coarse grains, sometimes bulked up with whatever flour substitutes were available. Oak acorns if you're lucky. Sawdust if you're not. The texture resembles wet concrete, and it tastes about how you'd expect Roman concrete to taste. This loaf wasn't baked yesterday or even the day before. It might be older than some of your friendships. The wine is diluted because drinking straight wine for breakfast is considered barbaric, even by Roman standards. Unless you're a senator, in which case different rules apply entirely. But you're not a senator. You're just someone trying to start the day with something that resembles nutrition and won't immediately poison you. There's no kitchen in your apartment, remember? So this feast is consumed standing in the street, leaning against a fountain, or squatting beside other equally disappointed citizens. If you've managed to acquire some olive oil or a smear of garum, that fermented fish sauce that Romans put on everything, then congratulations. You've added aromatic horror to your already questionable meal. Occasionally, if the gods smile upon you and your coin purse isn't completely empty, a street vendor might wander by selling honeyed pastries or chickpea fritters. For a moment, your heart lifts with possibility. Then you remember that your budget consists of whatever copper coins you found in your tunic pocket, and those vendors aren't running a charity. So you chew your bread, pretending it's something edible, and sip your wine, telling yourself it's building character. Around you, other Romans are conducting the same morning ritual of gustatory endurance. Some look resigned. Others look actively angry at their breakfast. A few optimists are trying to convince themselves that if they chew long enough, the bread might develop flavor. This is how Romans start their day. Not with energy and enthusiasm, but with carbohydrates and mild intoxication. You're now properly prepared to face a day of manual labor, dodging carts, and trying not to fall into any open sewers. The bread sits in your stomach like a stone. The wine creates a gentle buzz that might help you forget how much your life resembles a survival exercise. But hey, you're fed. Sort of. And in Roman terms, not dying of starvation before noon counts as success. After your inspiring breakfast of punishment bread and sadness wine, It's time to earn your daily bread. And by earn, I mean work harder than you've ever worked in your life, for longer hours than should be legal, in conditions that would horrify modern workplace safety inspectors. Unless you're a senator, a successful merchant, or blessed with wealthy relatives, you're about to discover why most Romans had the life expectancy of a medieval peasant with bad luck. You might be a laborer, hauling stone blocks for yet another temple to yet another god who doesn't seem particularly concerned with your welfare. Or perhaps you're a potter, competing with dozens of other potters in a market where undercutting prices is the norm and quality is optional. Maybe you're a street cleaner, which in Rome means you're fighting a losing battle against an endless tide of human and animal waste. If you're truly unfortunate, you might be working in the sewers, maintaining the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer system. This involves wading through water that's roughly 50% sewage and 50% things you don't want to identify. The pay is terrible, the working conditions are worse, and the job security depends entirely on your ability to not die of disease or drown in other people's waste. The Roman workday starts before dawn because the sun doesn't wait for anyone, and neither do your supervisors. You work in sandals that provide all the protection and support of wet paper, using tools that were probably ancient when your grandfather was young. There are no gloves, no hard hats, no safety equipment of any kind. If you get hurt, you wrap it in a dirty cloth and keep working, because stopping means not getting paid, and not getting paid means not eating. Construction work means lifting stones that weigh more than you do, often while balanced on scaffolding that was built by the lowest bidder and inspected by no one. If you fall, your colleagues will pause just long enough to see if you're still breathing before getting back to work. Workers who die on the job are quickly replaced and their families are left to figure out survival on their own. If you're a craftsman, congratulations on your slightly elevated status. You still work from sunrise to sunset, but at least you're not carrying stone blocks up ramps. Instead, you're competing with every other craftsman in the city, fighting for customers who want the highest quality at the lowest price, delivered yesterday. Mess up an order, and your reputation is ruined. Your reputation is ruined, and you're back to hauling stones or cleaning sewers. Women work too because poverty doesn't discriminate. They spin wool, weave cloth, sell vegetables in the markets, and manage households while raising children and trying not to die in childbirth. They do all of this while maintaining the pretense that they're not working as hard as the men, because Roman society prefers its women to be decorative rather than exhausted. Even children work. By age 5 or 6, they're helping with family trades, carrying messages, or performing simple labor. Education is for the wealthy. Everyone else learns by doing, and what they learn is that life is hard, work is harder, and complaining gets you nowhere. The Romans had a saying, labor omnia vincit, work conquers all. What they didn't mention is that work also conquers your back, your hands, your spirit, and your will to live. But hey, at least you're contributing to the glory of the empire, one back-breaking day at a time. You've survived the morning's work without losing any limbs or falling into the Tiber River. Now comes the challenge of navigating the Roman street, a chaotic nightmare that makes modern rush-hour traffic look like a peaceful stroll through a park. The Roman street isn't just a place to walk. It's a gladiatorial arena where pedestrians, carts, animals, and basic sanitation fight to the death. Picture this. The sun is climbing toward its zenith, and the city is fully awake. The air vibrates with the sound of thousands of people conducting business in a dozen languages, animals making animal noises, and the constant rumble of wooden wheels on stone pavements. It smells like a combination of cooking food, human sweat, animal waste, rotting fish, and whatever that mysterious brown substance in the gutter might be. Spoiler alert. You don't want to know. The Roman street is engineered with typical Roman efficiency. There are raised sidewalks for pedestrians and a channel down the middle for carts, drainage, and general flowing waste. The theory is sound. The practice is chaos. Stepping off the sidewalk without looking both ways could result in being trampled by oxen, run over by a cart, or baptized in the flowing contents of the city's digestive system. Traffic laws exist, sort of. Heavy carts are banned during daylight hours in the city center, which means they race through the streets at night when you can't see them coming. It's like a deadly game of hide and seek, except instead of hiding behind trees, You're hiding from 2-ton wagons driven by people who consider pedestrians to be speed bumps. The sidewalks are crowded beyond belief. You're sharing space with merchants carrying impossibly heavy loads, slaves running errands for their masters, children who should probably be in school but instead are running wild, beggars trying to catch your eye, pickpockets trying to catch your purse, and prostitutes trying to catch your attention for entirely different reasons. Street vendors add to the chaos, setting up temporary stalls wherever they can find space, which is usually right in the middle of where people are trying to walk. They're selling everything from questionable meat pies to jewelry that will turn your skin green, and they're all shouting at the same time, trying to be heard over the general din. Animals are everywhere. Horses, donkeys, pigs, chickens, dogs, cats, and the occasional escaped exotic pet from some wealthy Roman's private menagerie. These animals don't observe traffic laws, don't clean up after themselves, and don't care if you're in a hurry. Step in the wrong spot, and you'll discover that Roman sandals were not designed for easy cleaning. Public entertainment happens spontaneously. Street musicians, acrobats, performers, and the occasional impromptu fight between citizens who've had too much wine or too little patience. Sometimes these performances are intentional. Sometimes they're just daily life in Rome, which can be entertaining if you're not the one being beaten with a fish. The smell. Oh, the smell. It's a symphony of aromas that would make a modern sewage treatment plant seem fragrant by comparison. Cooking food fights with rotting garbage. Incense from temples battles with the scent of unwashed humanity. Perfume from wealthy ladies mingles with the earthy fragrance of horse manure. It's an olfactory adventure that never ends and never improves. And through all of this chaos, you're trying to get from point A to point B without being robbed, trampled, poisoned, or accidentally enlisted in someone else's religious procession. The Roman street doesn't just test your navigation skills, it tests your will to live. Welcome to urban planning, Roman style. By now, you're hot, sweaty, covered in street dust, and desperately craving something cool and refreshing. The good news is that you live in Rome, a city famous for its magnificent aqueducts, those engineering marvels that carry fresh mountain water directly into the heart of the empire. The bad news is that by the time that water reaches you, it's been through a journey that would make a modern health inspector weep. The Roman aqueduct system is genuinely impressive. Mountain springs flow through carefully engineered channels, across valleys on towering arches, through underground tunnels, and into the city where it supplies fountains, baths, and private homes. It's a triumph of engineering that won't be matched for centuries. Unfortunately, triumph of engineering doesn't necessarily mean triumph of public health. If you're wealthy enough to live in a domus with private plumbing, congratulations on your good fortune and your impending lead poisoning. Roman pipes are made of lead, which gives the water a slightly sweet taste that Romans actually enjoyed. They didn't understand that this sweet taste was slowly driving them insane, causing anemia, gout, infertility, and various other delightful side effects. The word plumbing comes from the Latin word for lead, plumbum, which should have been a clue. But you're not wealthy. You get your water from public fountains, shared by thousands of your closest unwashed neighbors. These fountains are constantly flowing, which sounds sanitary until you realize that the same spout that fills your jug also serves as a place for people to wash their hands, rinse their feet, clean their vegetables, and occasionally bathe their children or livestock. The water in these fountains comes from the same source as the wealthy Romans' private supply, but by the time it reaches the public fountains, it has passed through a distribution system that includes settling tanks where debris accumulates, pipes that haven't been cleaned since the reign of Augustus, and storage facilities that double as breeding grounds for every waterborne parasite in the Mediterranean. Want to clean yourself? Time for a trip to the Thermae, the public baths, which are simultaneously one of Rome's greatest achievements and one of its most effective disease distribution systems. The Roman baths are magnificent. Multiple pools at different temperatures, massage areas, exercise spaces, and social gathering places where Romans conduct business, gossip, and pretend they're not marinating in each other's skin cells. The bathing process follows a ritual. First, you undress and store your clothes in a basket, hoping the bath attendant is more honest than he appears. Then you work up a sweat in the hot, dry room, the laconicum, or the hot, steamy room, the caldarium. Next, you scrape the sweat and dirt off your skin with a strigil, a curved metal tool that removes the top layer of everything, including occasionally some actual skin. Finally, you move through progressively cooler pools, ending in the frigidarium, the cold pool, where you shock your system back to consciousness and wonder why you thought this was a good idea. The water in these pools is changed regularly, by Roman standards, which means it's changed when it becomes visibly disgusting or when too many people complain about the floaty bits. The water isn't chlorinated, obviously, and it isn't filtered beyond occasional straining through cloth. You're essentially bathing in a warm soup of everything that's fallen off everyone who's been in the water before you. Skin cells, hair, various bodily fluids, and whatever diseases they might have been carrying. The Romans believed this was healthy and social. Modern microbiologists would classify it as a biological weapon. For drinking, many Romans preferred wine, and not just because they were a culture of sophisticated drinkers. They understood that wine was safer than water, especially in areas where the water supply was questionable. Even children drank diluted wine because it was less likely to kill them than the alternative. So yes, Rome had amazing aqueducts and impressive hydraulic engineering. But if you were hoping for clean, safe drinking water, you were about 1,500 years too early. The Romans had solved the problem of moving water across great distances. They hadn't quite figured out how to keep it from poisoning the people who drank it. Let's say you've made it through the morning without being trampled, poisoned, or accidentally recruited into someone's private army. You're feeling pretty good about your survival skills. Then you stub your toe on a loose stone, develop an infected blister from your inadequate sandals, or come down with what might be food poisoning from that questionable breakfast. Time to seek medical attention in ancient Rome, where the cure is often worse than the disease, and the treatment might actually be the thing that kills you. Roman medicine is based on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this system, all illness results from an imbalance of these fluids in your body. Feeling feverish? You have too much blood. Feeling melancholy? Excess black bile. Feeling nauseated? Yellow bile is acting up. The solution to almost everything involves removing some fluid from your body, usually blood, because Roman doctors believe in the healing power of making you weaker. Your doctor, who might also be your barber, your surgeon, and your local philosopher, immediately reaches for the leeches. These delightful creatures are applied to various parts of your body where they gorge themselves on your blood while you try not to think about what else might be living in their digestive systems. If leeches aren't available, the doctor uses a sharp knife to open a vein and let the bad blood drain out. How much blood is too much? That's a judgment call, and Roman doctors are notoriously optimistic about their patients' blood reserves. Feeling depressed? Clearly, you need to have some black bile drained from your system. This involves various purging techniques that would be considered torture in modern times. Powerful laxatives made from herbs that could strip paint, induced vomiting that leaves you weak and dehydrated, and dietary restrictions that ensure you're too hungry to be sad. Surgery does exist, and Roman surgeons are surprisingly skilled at cutting people open and putting them back together. What they lack is any understanding of sterilization, anesthesia, or infection control. Operations are performed while you're fully conscious, gripping a leather strap between your teeth and hoping you'll pass out from the pain before the surgeon gets to the really difficult part. The surgical instruments are impressive: scalpels, forceps, bone saws, and various specialized tools that look more like torture devices than medical equipment. They're cleaned between patients by wiping them on a cloth or rinsing them in wine, which does provide some antiseptic benefit, but not enough to prevent most infections. Post-surgical care involves packing wounds with various substances that Romans believe promote healing: honey, which actually does help; wine, which provides some antiseptic benefit; crushed herbs, which may or may not do anything useful; and occasionally animal dung, which definitely doesn't help and usually makes everything worse. Prescriptions are a combination of practical remedies and magical thinking. Willow bark for pain, which actually contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin, so that one works. Honey for wound care, which is genuinely effective due to its antibacterial properties, but also crushed beetles for various ailments, specific types of animal urine for different conditions, and complex preparations involving rare herbs that may or may not exist. Mental illness is treated with a combination of bloodletting, purging, and advice to think more positive thoughts. Depression is clearly a result of too much black bile, so the treatment involves draining fluids until you're too weak to be sad. Anxiety is treated with wine and herbs that may or may not be actual medicine. If none of the traditional treatments work, you're advised to sleep in a temple dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine, and hope for healing dreams. This is actually one of the safer treatment options, since it involves rest, a clean environment, and priests who at least try not to make you worse. Roman medicine isn't entirely useless. Roman doctors understand anatomy better than their predecessors, thanks to their experience with gladiator injuries and military casualties. They can set bones, stitch wounds, and perform some surprisingly complex surgical procedures. But they're operating without any understanding of germs, bacteria, or the basic principles of infection control. So when you wake up tomorrow with what might be a cold, remember that seeking medical attention in ancient Rome could involve being bled, purged, and possibly operated on without anesthesia by someone whose previous patient may not have survived the experience. Sometimes, the best medical advice is to stay home, drink some wine, and hope it goes away on its own. After a long day of dodging carts, breathing lead-contaminated air, and trying not to fall into the cloaca maxima, you're understandably hungry. Time for cena, the main Roman meal of the day, which promises to be just as disappointing as breakfast, but with more courses and greater potential for food poisoning. First, let's establish what's not on the menu. No tomatoes, because they haven't been discovered yet. No potatoes, no corn, no chocolate, no sugar, no coffee, and definitely no pizza. The foods that define Italian cuisine today were completely unknown to the Romans. This is pre-Italian Italy, where the cuisine consists of whatever you can grow, catch, or steal without getting executed. You sit down to your evening meal, probably on a simple wooden stool, because chairs with backs are for wealthy people and foreign concepts. Your dinner is served in a clay bowl that's seen better decades, and your utensils consist of a knife, a spoon, and your fingers. Forks won't be invented for several centuries, so you're going to get intimately familiar with your food. The main course is likely to be pulmentum, a porridge made from whatever grains are available, mixed with beans, vegetables, or small pieces of meat if you're feeling wealthy. It's thick, it's brown, and it tastes like wet cardboard with occasional lumps of protein. The texture resembles mortar, and it might actually be more nutritious than mortar, though that's not guaranteed. If there's meat on your table, it's probably preserved in some way, because refrigeration won't be invented for another couple of thousand years. This means it's heavily salted, dried, smoked, or pickled in wine or vinegar. It might also be slightly spoiled, but Roman seasoning is designed to mask the taste of food that's gone a bit off. That's where garum comes in. Garum is Rome's national condiment, a fermented fish sauce made by layering fish entrails and salt in clay pots and letting them rot in the sun for several months. The resulting liquid is strained off and used to flavor everything. It's incredibly salty, incredibly pungent, and incredibly popular. Romans put it on meat, vegetables, bread, and probably on other Romans if they sit still long enough. It tastes like the ocean's revenge and smells like low tide mixed with regret. Vegetables are available if they're in season and if you can afford them. Root vegetables like turnips and parsnips, leafy greens when available, and the occasional onion or leek. These are usually boiled until they surrender their will to live, then seasoned with salt, oil, or garum. Fresh vegetables are a luxury because preserving them is difficult, and transporting them is expensive. Bread accompanies every meal, assuming you can afford it. Roman bread is denser and coarser than modern bread, made from wheat if you're wealthy, barley if you're middle class, and questionable grains mixed with fillers if you're poor. The fillers might include sawdust, ground acorns, or whatever else can be milled into powder and baked without killing anyone immediately. Wine is the beverage of choice, but it's always diluted with water because drinking straight wine is considered barbaric. The water used for dilution is the same questionable water you've been avoiding all day, so you're basically choosing between different methods of potential poisoning. The wine helps mask the taste of the water, and the water helps ensure you don't end up passed out in a gutter before the evening entertainment begins. Dessert consists of whatever fruit is available and hasn't rotted yet. Apples, pears, grapes, or figs if you're lucky. Honey is used as a sweetener, but it's expensive and usually reserved for special occasions or wealthy people who want to show off. Sugar doesn't exist, so Roman desserts are less sweet and more practical. Rich Romans dine on exotic delicacies designed to demonstrate wealth rather than taste. Roasted peacock with the feathers replaced after cooking, stuffed dormice, flamingo tongues, and other foods that exist primarily to show how much money you can waste on dinner. These dishes are often more impressive than edible, but that's not really the point. There are no napkins at your meal. You wipe your hands on bread, which is then discarded, or on a shared cloth that's been used by everyone else at the table. Personal hygiene during meals is a collective effort that's not particularly effective. By the end of your meal, you're full but not satisfied, slightly drunk but not happy, and wondering if that funny taste in the garum was supposed to be there, or if you're going to spend the night becoming intimately acquainted with your chamber pot. Roman cuisine isn't about pleasure. It's about survival, nutrition, and the social rituals that hold the empire together. Tomorrow's meal will be remarkably similar to today's, and the day after that, and every day until you die of old age, disease, or accidentally eating something that disagrees with you more than usual. After choking down your evening meal of questionable pork and fermented fish sauce, you might be hoping for some relaxation, a bit of entertainment to take your mind off the fact that you're living in a city where the air is poisonous and the water is trying to kill you. Well, you're in luck, because Roman entertainment is everywhere. Unfortunately, most of it involves watching people die in creative ways, and the rest involves risking your own life for other people's amusement. Let's start with the main event. The Colosseum, that magnificent amphitheater where Rome gathers to watch the systematic slaughter of humans, animals, and occasionally, common sense. The games are free to attend, which sounds generous until you realize that free entertainment in ancient Rome usually means someone's going to die horribly, and there's a decent chance it might be you if you're not careful. You pack into the Colosseum with 50,000 of your closest unwashed neighbors, sitting on stone seats that were designed by people who apparently had no understanding of human anatomy. The wealthy sit in the shade near the arena, while you're up in the nosebleed sections where the sun beats down mercilessly, and the view is mostly of other people's heads. The entertainment begins with venaciones, wild animal hunts where exotic beasts imported from across the empire are released into the arena to fight each other, or trained hunters. Lions, tigers, bears, elephants, rhinoceroses, and other creatures that have traveled hundreds of miles just to die for the amusement of Romans who are bored with regular forms of entertainment. These aren't fair fights. The animals are often starved, confused, and terrified. The hunters are usually condemned criminals or slaves who fight not for glory, but because the alternative is being fed to the animals without weapons. It's less a hunt and more an elaborate execution with theatrical elements. Next come the gladiators, those legendary warriors of the arena who fight to the death for the cheers of the crowd. Except most gladiators don't actually fight to the death, because trained fighters are expensive and killing them every time they fight is bad for business. Most gladiator fights end when one fighter is wounded or yields, at which point the crowd votes on whether he lives or dies. But some fights are programmed to end in death, especially when the gladiators are condemned criminals or prisoners of war who are fighting their first and last battle in the arena. These men know they're going to die, and the crowd knows it too. It's execution disguised as entertainment, death packaged as sport. The really special days feature naumachii, mock naval battles where the arena is flooded and real ships fight with real crews who really die when their ships sink, or when enemy sailors really stab them with real weapons. It's like a historical reenactment, except the participants don't get to go home afterward. Between events, condemned criminals are executed in ways designed to entertain the crowd: crucifixion, burning, being fed to wild animals, or forced to reenact mythological scenes that end with the actor's actual death. A man might be forced to play Orpheus, complete with lyre, right up until the moment when the wild animals tear him apart, at which point the myth becomes reality. If the Colosseum is too intense for your taste, you can try the Circus Maximus, where chariot racing provides a slightly less deadly form of entertainment. Chariots race around a track at breakneck speeds. Drivers are thrown from their vehicles, horses are injured, and spectators occasionally get trampled by runaway teams. It's exciting, dangerous, and involves extensive betting by people who can't afford to lose money but do it anyway. The crowd at chariot races is divided into factions: blues, greens, reds, and whites, and the rivalry between these groups sometimes erupts into full-scale riots that leave hundreds dead. Supporting the wrong team in the wrong neighborhood can get you killed, but not supporting any team marks you as a suspicious outsider who might be a spy or a barbarian. If you prefer theater, Roman drama offers comedies that rely heavily on slapstick humor, sexual innuendo, and jokes about bodily functions. The humor is broad, loud, and designed to be understood by people who are half-drunk and wholly illiterate. Tragedies are performed too, but they're often overshadowed by the knowledge that real tragedies are happening just down the road at the Colosseum. Street entertainment is available everywhere. Acrobats, musicians, storytellers, snake charmers, and various con artists who will gladly separate you from your money while performing impressive feats of dexterity and deception. Fire breathers risk burning down half the neighborhood for a few copper coins, while musicians play instruments that sound like cats being slowly tortured. But all of this entertainment serves a purpose beyond simple amusement. The Roman government understands that a population distracted by blood and spectacle is a population that's not thinking too hard about taxes, corruption, or the fact that their water supply is slowly poisoning them. Give the people bread and circuses, and they'll tolerate almost anything else you do to them. The entertainment also reinforces social hierarchies. The wealthy sit in comfort while the poor sweat in the sun. Citizens enjoy rights that non-citizens don't have. Free men watch slaves die for their amusement. Everyone knows their place, and the arena makes it clear what happens to people who forget where they belong. So yes, Roman entertainment is spectacular, bloody, and free. It's also a reminder that in the Roman Empire, human life is cheap, violence is normal, and your value as a person depends entirely on your social status and your ability to avoid being fed to lions. You've survived the entertainment without being accidentally recruited as a gladiator or trampled by an angry crowd. You might think you can relax now, that as long as you keep your head down and follow the rules, Roman law will protect you. That's adorable. Roman justice is less about protection and more about reminding you that the empire can crush you whenever it wants, and the legal system is just the method by which that crushing happens. Let's start with the basics: legal status. If you're a full Roman citizen, congratulations, you have rights. In theory, you can't be flogged in public without a trial, you can appeal sentences, and you're entitled to certain legal protections. If you're a Latin citizen, you have some rights, but fewer protections. If you're a peregrinus, a free foreigner, you have even fewer rights and no legal protections worth mentioning. If you're a slave, you're property, and property doesn't have rights. If a slave kills his master, every slave in the household can be executed, regardless of whether they were involved. This isn't justice, it's terrorism, designed to prevent slave uprisings by making every slave responsible for every other slave's behavior. Criminal law is straightforward. If you're accused of a crime, you'd better hope you're wealthy enough to afford good representation, because Roman courts aren't interested in your version of events unless you can pay someone to present it eloquently. Trials are public spectacles, where the outcome often depends more on the social status of the participants than on the evidence. If you're poor and accused of theft, you're probably guilty in the eyes of the court before you even speak. If you're wealthy and accused of murder, you can hire skilled orators who will convince the jury that the victim probably deserved it and that you're actually a hero for providing him with an opportunity for a glorious death. Punishments are designed to be public, humiliating, and memorable. Thieves might have their hands cut off or be branded on the forehead so everyone knows what they've done. Liars could have their tongues pierced or cut out entirely. Adulterers might be executed or exiled depending on their gender and social status. Crucifixion is reserved for slaves, foreigners, and rebels, which makes it the most common form of execution for anyone who isn't a Roman citizen. It's slow, painful, public, and designed to serve as a warning to anyone else who might be considering disobedience. The crucified person dies of exhaustion and suffocation over the course of hours or days, while crowds gather to watch and vendors sell snacks. If you're a Roman citizen condemned to death, You get the privilege of being beheaded, which is quick and relatively painless. Unless you've committed treason, in which case you might be thrown from the Tarpeian Rock, fed to wild animals, or executed in some other creative way that demonstrates the state's displeasure. Civil law is just as complicated and unfair. Property disputes are decided by judges who might be bribed by either party or both parties, or neither party but influenced by political considerations that have nothing to do with who actually owns what. Marriage law is designed to benefit men and preserve family wealth. Women have few rights in marriage and no right to divorce except under very specific circumstances. Men can divorce their wives for almost any reason, but wives who want to divorce their husbands need to prove adultery, abandonment, or criminal behavior, and even then, they might not be successful. Debt law is particularly harsh. If you owe money and can't pay, you can be sold into slavery to work off the debt. Your family can also be sold into slavery to pay your debts, which creates a powerful incentive to not borrow money you can't repay, but doesn't help much if you've already borrowed it. The legal system is also incredibly slow. Cases can drag on for months or years, during which time the accused might be held in prison under conditions that make your insula look like a luxury resort. Many people die in prison before their cases are resolved, which the courts consider a form of divine judgment. Law enforcement is handled by the vigiles, who are underpaid, overworked, and often corrupt. They're supposed to prevent crime, investigate violations, and maintain order, but they're more likely to accept bribes to look the other way or to arrest innocent people who can't afford to pay them off. If you're the victim of a crime, don't expect much help from the authorities. Unless you're wealthy or politically connected, your case will receive minimal attention, and the investigation will consist mainly of asking if you know who did it and whether you can prove it. So when you go to bed tonight in your flea-infested mattress, remember that Roman law exists to protect the empire, not to protect you. Justice is available for those who can afford it, and everyone else gets to hope they never need it. After a long day of dodging legal prosecution and trying not to be eaten by wild animals for entertainment, you might be looking for some spiritual comfort, a little peace, perhaps a personal relationship with the divine. Unfortunately, Roman religion isn't about personal comfort or inner peace. It's about public ritual, state control, and making sure you don't accidentally anger a god who might decide to destroy the entire city because you forgot to leave an offering at the right shrine. Roman religion is transactional. You give the gods what they want, they give you what you need, and everyone stays happy. The problem is figuring out what the gods want, because they never actually tell you, and getting it wrong can have consequences that range from bad luck to being struck by lightning. There are gods for everything. Jupiter rules the sky and throws thunderbolts when he's angry. Mars handles war and violence, which means he's always busy. Minerva manages wisdom and warfare, because apparently wisdom and violence go together in the Roman mind. Venus controls love and beauty, Neptune rules the seas, and Vulcan manages fire and metalworking. But that's just the major gods. There are also minor gods for every aspect of daily life. Cardia protects door hinges. Cloacina watches over sewers. Terminus guards boundaries. Robigus prevents mildew. There's probably a god responsible for the proper function of your chamber pot, and if you don't honor that god appropriately, your morning routine is going to be even more unpleasant than usual. You can't walk 5 steps in Rome without encountering a shrine, altar, or sacred space that requires some form of acknowledgement. Nod respectfully, leave a small offering, mutter a prayer, or at minimum don't spit near the sacred stones. Ignore these obligations, and you're inviting divine retribution that could affect not just you, but your entire neighborhood. Religious festivals fill the Roman calendar. Saturnalia in December, when social order is temporarily reversed and slaves mock their masters. Lupercalia in February, when half-naked men run through the streets whipping people with goat-skin strips for fertility and purification. Vestalia in June, when the sacred fire of Vesta is renewed and the city's spiritual safety is ensured for another year. These aren't optional celebrations. Participation is expected, attendance is monitored, and failure to show proper enthusiasm can mark you as impious, atheistic, or suspiciously foreign. During religious festivals, business stops, courts close, and everyone pretends to be deeply spiritual while getting drunk and arguing about politics. Emperor worship adds another layer of complexity to your religious obligations. The emperor isn't just your political leader. He's a living god who requires veneration, sacrifice, and public displays of loyalty. You're expected to burn incense at his altar, participate in ceremonies honoring his divine nature, and never ever suggest that he might be anything less than perfect. This creates problems if you happen to follow a religion that worships only one god and considers emperor worship to be blasphemy. Early Christians, Jews, and followers of various mystery cults find themselves in the awkward position of choosing between their religious convictions and their continued existence. Most choose existence, at least publicly. Foreign cults are tolerated as long as they don't interfere with traditional Roman religion and don't attract too many followers. Mystery religions like the cult of Mithras or the worship of Isis offer personal salvation and spiritual transformation, which sounds appealing until you realize that joining these cults often involves secret initiations, blood sacrifices, and rituals that would be illegal if they were conducted in public. The Vestal Virgins maintain the sacred fire that protects Rome's spiritual safety. These women are chosen as children, sworn to 30 years of celibacy, and tasked with keeping a fire burning that must never be allowed to go out. If the fire dies, it's considered an omen of disaster. If a Vestal Virgin breaks her vow of chastity, she's buried alive. The pressure of being responsible for the spiritual safety of the entire empire while maintaining perfect celibacy for 3 decades would drive most people insane. Augury and divination are serious business in Rome. Before any important decision, birds must be consulted, entrails must be examined, and omens must be interpreted by trained priests who claim to understand what the gods are trying to communicate through the flight patterns of chickens. If the omens are bad, the decision must be postponed until more favorable signs appear. This means that military campaigns, political appointments, and major construction projects can be delayed indefinitely because a sacred chicken refused to eat grain or because someone saw a crow flying in the wrong direction. Private religious practice is also important, but it must be conducted in addition to, not instead of, public religious obligations. You can pray to your household gods, make offerings to your ancestors, and seek divine protection for your family, but you still have to participate in state religion, honor the emperor, and contribute to public festivals. So when you kneel beside your straw mattress tonight to pray for survival, remember to thank all the appropriate gods, in the correct order, with the proper rituals, while avoiding any prayers that might be interpreted as treasonous, impious, or suspiciously foreign. The gods are watching, the priests are listening, and your neighbors are always ready to report suspicious religious activity. Roman religion isn't about finding spiritual peace. It's about maintaining cosmic order through proper ritual observance, and the consequences of getting it wrong are more than you want to risk. You've managed to avoid divine punishment for your questionable religious observance, and you haven't been arrested for any crimes you may or may not have committed. Now comes the most exhausting part of Roman life: navigating the social hierarchy, a complex system of ranks, relationships, and obligations that determines everything from where you sit at dinner to whether you live or die. Roman society is structured like a pyramid, except it's a pyramid covered in grease and lined with knives, where every step up requires someone else to fall down, and most people spend their entire lives trying not to slip back to the bottom. At the top are the senators, those distinguished gentlemen who trace their lineage back to the founding of Rome and own enough land to qualify as small kingdoms. They wear togas with purple stripes, live in magnificent houses, and make decisions that affect millions of people they've never met and wouldn't recognize if they stepped on them in the street. Below the senators are the equestrians, the wealthy business class who have enough money to buy their way into respectability, but lack the ancient bloodlines that would make them truly aristocratic. They're rich enough to look down on everyone below them, but not aristocratic enough to be accepted by those above them, which makes them bitter, ambitious, and dangerous. Then come the plebeians, the common citizens, which includes you if you're lucky enough to have been born in the right place to the right parents. Plebeians range from relatively prosperous merchants and skilled craftsmen down to barely surviving laborers and unemployed masses who depend on government grain doles to avoid starvation. Below the plebeians are the freedmen, former slaves who have been manumitted but still bear the social stigma of their former status. They can't hold political office, can't serve in the legions, and are expected to show eternal gratitude to their former masters, who generously decided to stop owning them as property. At the bottom are the slaves, who aren't considered people at all, but rather expensive tools that can think and occasionally complain. Slaves have no rights, no legal protections, and no hope of advancement except through the questionable mercy of their owners. Within each level of this hierarchy, there are countless subdivisions and gradations. Rich plebeians look down on poor plebeians. Urban slaves consider themselves superior to rural slaves. Gladiators, despite being slaves, command more respect than free citizens who work in sewers. Everyone has someone to look down on, and everyone has someone looking down on them. Social advancement is theoretically possible, but practically difficult. You can't buy your way into the senatorial class because membership requires not just wealth, but also ancient family connections. You can become wealthy enough to join the equestrian order, but that requires accumulating more money than most people see in several lifetimes. The patron-client system governs most social relationships outside your immediate family. If you want to get anywhere in Roman society, you need a patron, a wealthy and influential person who will protect you, advance your interests, and occasionally throw you small amounts of money in exchange for your complete loyalty and obedience. Every morning, you join the salutatio, the daily ritual where clients gather at their patron's house to pay their respects, receive instructions, and compete for attention and favors. You wait in line with dozens of other clients, all hoping to be noticed, all pretending to be grateful for the opportunity to grovel. If your patron likes you, he might recommend you for a job, lend you money, or protect you from legal trouble. If he doesn't like you, or if he simply forgets you exist, you're on your own. Patrons die, lose interest, or find more useful clients, and when that happens, you're back to looking for someone else willing to accept your servitude in exchange for minimal protection. The clothing you wear, the food you eat, the house you live in, and the people you associate with all communicate your social status to everyone around you. Wear clothes that are too fine for your station, and you'll be mocked as pretentious. Wear clothes that are too shabby, and you'll be dismissed as worthless. The Romans have developed a complex visual language of status indicators, and everyone is constantly reading and being read. Marriage is a political and economic transaction that can raise or lower your social status depending on whom you marry and how the alliance works out. Love is for poets and slaves. Everyone else marries for advantage, connections, and the hope that their children will be born into a higher social class than they were. Dinner parties are social minefields where the seating arrangement communicates everyone's relative status, and a single mistake in protocol can destroy relationships that took years to build. You must know whom to greet first, how to address each person according to their rank, and how to navigate conversations that are simultaneously social, political, and potentially dangerous. Even death doesn't free you from social hierarchy. The size and location of your tomb, the materials used in your burial, and the inscriptions on your monument all serve to communicate your social status to future generations. Poor people are burned on communal pyres outside the city walls. Rich people get elaborate tombs along major roads where everyone can see how important they were. So as you lie down on your straw mattress tonight, surrounded by the sounds of your neighbors arguing about rent and the smell of cooking turnips, remember that your social status is probably as low as it's ever going to get. You can work harder, save money, find better patrons, and make strategic marriages. But the fundamental structure of Roman society is designed to keep you exactly where you are. Grateful to not be a slave, too poor to matter, and too powerless to change anything. The ladder of Roman social hierarchy extends infinitely upward, but the rungs are greased with the blood and sweat of everyone who's tried to climb it, and most people who attempt the ascent find themselves right back where they started. Only now they're exhausted, broke, and cynical about the possibility of improvement. The sun is setting over the 7 hills of Rome, painting the sky the color of diluted wine mixed with resignation. For a moment, you might think that the end of the day means rest, quiet, and perhaps a few hours of peace, you would be tragically wrong. Nighttime in Rome isn't when the city sleeps. It's when the city transforms into something darker, louder, and infinitely more dangerous. First, let's discuss lighting, or rather, the complete absence of it. Unless you're wealthy enough to afford oil lamps that burn all night, and very few people are, you're navigating the city by moonlight, starlight, and the faint glow of fires that might be cooking fires or might be buildings burning down. It's often impossible to tell the difference until you're close enough to be either fed or incinerated. The vigils, Rome's official night watch, are supposed to patrol the streets, prevent fires, and stop crimes. In reality, they're understaffed, underpaid, and often more interested in taking bribes than actually doing their jobs. Some are genuinely dedicated to public safety, but they're vastly outnumbered by criminals, fires, and the general chaos that emerges when 50 million people try to coexist without adequate lighting or police protection. Speaking of criminals, they love the Roman night. Thieves, muggers, con artists, and the occasional unemployed gladiator roam the dark streets looking for opportunities. If you must go out after dark, which you probably must because Roman cities don't shut down just because the sun sets, you're essentially volunteering to be a victim. Unless you're armed, fast, or accompanied by people who are armed and fast, you're going to lose something valuable. Hopefully, it's just your money. Fire is the great terror of Roman nights. Those charming wooden apartment buildings where you live are essentially giant kindling piles waiting for a spark. A knocked-over oil lamp, an unattended cooking fire, or even spontaneous combustion from accumulated garbage can turn an entire city block into an inferno within hours. The Great Fire of 64 CE didn't start itself, but once it began, it raged for 6 days and destroyed 10 of Rome's 14 districts. This wasn't a unique event. It was Tuesday in Rome. Fires happen constantly, and when they do, there's no organized fire department, no evacuation plan, and no firefighting equipment beyond buckets and hope. When you smell smoke in the middle of the night, and you will smell smoke, you have to make a quick decision. Is this someone cooking dinner illegally, or is this the fire that's going to kill you? If you guess wrong and wait too long to evacuate, you'll discover that Roman architecture doesn't include fire escapes, emergency exits, or any consideration for the possibility that residents might need to leave quickly. The noise level at night is actually worse than during the day. Remember those heavy carts that are banned from the city center during daylight hours? They all come out at night, rumbling through the streets like prehistoric monsters, driven by people who can't see where they're going and don't particularly care what they hit along the way. Drunken parties spill out of taverns and private homes, filling the streets with people who are singing, fighting, vomiting, or all three simultaneously. Religious processions march through the city at all hours, carrying torches, beating drums, and chanting prayers to gods who probably wish everyone would be quieter. If a politician is celebrating a victory, getting married, or just feeling like having a parade, the entire city becomes a carnival of noise and confusion. Trumpets, drums, shouting, and the general sounds of thousands of people trying to have a good time while simultaneously trying not to be trampled or robbed. The prostitutes conduct most of their business at night, which adds another layer of activity to the streets. Romans are remarkably casual about sex, but the business of sex still attracts violence, crime, and the kind of people who make bad decisions and then involve innocent bystanders in the consequences. Street fights break out regularly, usually over money, women, politics, or the eternal question of whether the blue or green chariot racing team deserves more loyalty. These aren't polite disagreements. They're violent confrontations that can escalate into neighborhood-wide riots if enough people get involved. If you're a woman out alone at night, you're in serious danger. Roman streets after dark belong to men with weapons and men without scruples, and the two categories overlap considerably. Women who must travel at night usually do so in groups, accompanied by male relatives or guards, and even then they're taking risks that could result in robbery, assault, or worse. Trying to sleep through all this chaos is nearly impossible. Your insula creaks and groans like it's considering collapse, which it might be. Rats scurry through the walls, probably conducting their own tiny Roman society complete with politics and warfare. Your neighbors are coughing, snoring, arguing, and occasionally screaming, either from nightmares or from very real dangers. Somewhere in the distance, someone is always screaming. Sometimes it's passion, sometimes it's violence, sometimes it's someone being robbed or murdered, and sometimes it's just a drunk person who's lost and confused and thinks that screaming will help them find their way home. The smell of the city at night is even worse than during the day. All the garbage, sewage, and rotting food that accumulates during the day seems to ferment in the darkness, creating an olfactory experience that would make a battlefield seem fragrant by comparison. And yet, somehow, Romans adapt to all of this. They sleep through the noise, ignore the smells, and navigate the dangers because they don't have any choice. This is life in the greatest city of the ancient world. And if you want to be part of it, you have to accept that nighttime is when civilization takes a break and chaos takes over. So when you finally close your eyes on your straw mattress, listening to the sounds of a city that never truly sleeps, remember that surviving the night is an accomplishment in itself. If you wake up tomorrow morning with all your possessions, no stab wounds, and your building still standing, you've beaten the odds. The Roman knight doesn't care about your comfort, your safety, or your sanity. It's a test of endurance that you have to pass every single day, and the only reward for passing is the opportunity to try again tomorrow. Sweet dreams are a luxury you can't afford in a city where nightmares are the ambient background noise. Dawn breaks over Rome, assuming you survived the night without being murdered, burned alive, or crushed by falling masonry. Congratulations, you've made it through one complete day-night cycle in the Roman Empire. The bad news is that you have to do it all over again, and yesterday's challenges were just the warm-up act for today's main event. You wake up to the same sounds: yelling, crying babies, argumentative chickens, and the general din of a city that never learned the concept of sleeping in. Your straw mattress has somehow become even less comfortable overnight, possibly because the straw has compressed into something resembling concrete, or possibly because you've discovered muscles you didn't know you had, and they're all complaining loudly about yesterday's activities. Your chamber pot needs emptying again, which means another trip to the latrina, another encounter with the communal sponge, and another reminder that privacy is a concept that won't be invented for several more centuries. The other people at the public toilet are the same ones who were there yesterday, having the same conversations about the same topics, as if they've been trapped in some kind of scatological time loop. Breakfast is the same bread that tried to kill you yesterday, possibly older now and more determined to succeed. The wine is still watered down, the oil still tastes like lamp fuel, and the garum still smells like low tide mixed with regret. You eat it anyway, because the alternative is starving, and starving is considered poor form in Roman society. Work hasn't gotten any easier overnight. The stones are still heavy, the sewer still smells terrible, and your supervisor is still a petty tyrant who compensates for his own miserable life by making everyone else's life slightly more miserable. Your tools are still barely functional, your working conditions are still dangerous, and your wages are still barely enough to keep you alive. The streets are still chaotic, still smelly, and still filled with the same mix of dangerous vehicles, unpredictable animals, and people who consider personal space to be a foreign concept. The vendors are still selling questionable food at questionable prices, the beggars are still begging, and the pickpockets are still practicing their trade with admirable dedication. The water is still trying to poison you, slowly and subtly, through lead pipes that nobody realizes are toxic. The public baths are still breeding grounds for diseases that won't be named for another 1,000 years, and the fountains are still shared by people whose concept of hygiene is more theoretical than practical. Roman medicine is still based on the theory that all illness can be cured by removing various fluids from your body, preferably blood, and preferably with tools that haven't been properly cleaned since the Punic Wars. If you get sick, which you probably will because you're drinking poisoned water and breathing polluted air, your treatment will likely make you sicker than the original disease. The entertainment is still spectacularly violent. The legal system is still designed to protect everyone except you, and the religious obligations are still numerous enough to occupy most of your free time, assuming you had any free time, which you don't because you're too busy trying not to die. The social hierarchy is still rigged against you. Your neighbors are still suspicious and potentially dangerous, and your chances of advancing beyond your current station are still roughly equivalent to your chances of being struck by lightning while being eaten by lions during a solar eclipse. But here's the thing that would drive modern people insane. Romans accept all of this as normal. They don't expect life to be comfortable, safe, or fair. They don't assume that things will get better over time or that their children will have better lives than they do. They understand that existence is difficult, dangerous, and often short, and they've built their entire culture around the assumption that suffering is the natural state of humanity. This doesn't mean Romans are pessimistic. They find joy where they can, usually in simple pleasures like good wine, friendship, sex, and watching other people suffer in the arena. They celebrate festivals, tell jokes, fall in love, and create art that will inspire people for thousands of years. They just do all of this while accepting that life is fundamentally hard and that complaining about it won't make it any easier. The Roman attitude toward existence is essentially stoical. You control what you can control, you accept what you can't control, and you try to maintain your dignity while the world does its best to strip it away from you. This philosophy works reasonably well for people who don't expect much from life, but it would be psychologically devastating for people who grew up believing that happiness is a right rather than a rare gift. Modern people expect clean water, safe food, effective medicine, comfortable homes, meaningful work, personal freedom, and the opportunity for advancement. Romans expect to wake up alive, to find enough food to survive another day, and to die with some semblance of honor. Everything beyond that is a bonus. So as you begin your second day in the Roman Empire, remember that you're not just dealing with physical hardships. You're dealing with a completely different set of expectations about what life should be like. Romans aren't trying to optimize their happiness or achieve their full potential. They're trying to survive with dignity in a world that's actively hostile to human welfare. This isn't necessarily a worse way to live than modern life, but it's definitely a harder way to live, and it requires a kind of mental toughness that most modern people never develop because they never need to. Romans are tough because they have to be tough. Softness is a luxury they can't afford, both individually and culturally. And yet somehow, this harsh system produced one of the greatest civilizations in human history. Roman art, literature, architecture, engineering, law, and military tactics influenced the development of Europe and beyond for centuries. The Latin language evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman political concepts like republicanism, separation of powers, and representative government provided the foundation for modern democratic systems. But all of this cultural achievement came at a cost, and that cost was paid by ordinary people like you who lived difficult lives in difficult circumstances and somehow managed to build something extraordinary out of their shared suffering. Let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the plague in the aqueduct. If you've somehow managed to survive your first few days in ancient Rome without being murdered, executed, crushed, burned, or poisoned, you're probably feeling pretty confident about your survival skills. That confidence is about to be shattered by the invisible enemies that Romans face every day: disease, infection, and the Grim Reaper's extensive social network. Roman cities are perfect breeding grounds for every pathogen, parasite, and plague that the ancient world has to offer. You're living in overcrowded conditions with poor sanitation, drinking water that's contaminated with lead and sewage, eating food that's preserved with salt and hope, and breathing air that's thick with smoke, dust, and the exhalations of a million unwashed neighbors. Let's start with the obvious killers. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases spread through the population like gossip through a senator's wife's social circle. The Romans have built magnificent aqueducts to bring fresh water into the city, but they haven't figured out how to keep that water clean once it gets there. Public fountains, shared by thousands of people daily, become distribution points for whatever diseases are currently making the rounds. Respiratory diseases thrive in the smoky, dusty air of Roman cities. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, and other lung infections spread easily in the crowded insulae, where entire families sleep in single rooms and privacy is a luxury that nobody can afford. Coughing is so common that it's considered normal background noise, like the sound of cartwheels on cobblestones or politicians making promises they won't keep. Skin diseases are epidemic. Scabies, lice, fleas, and various fungal infections spread through the population via the public baths, shared clothing, and the general lack of understanding about how diseases transmit. Everyone itches constantly, and everyone assumes that constant itching is just part of being alive. Sexually transmitted diseases flourish in a culture that's remarkably casual about sex, but completely ignorant about sexual health. Syphilis won't be imported from the New World for another 1,500 years, but gonorrhea, chlamydia, and other bacterial infections are already well-established members of Roman society. Food poisoning is a daily risk. Without refrigeration, proper preservation techniques, or health inspections, Roman food is essentially a game of biological roulette. That fish you bought in the market might be fresh, or it might be 3 days old and crawling with bacteria. The only way to find out is to eat it and see what happens. Lead poisoning affects everyone, but wealthy Romans suffer more because they can afford lead pipes, lead-glazed pottery, and lead-based cosmetics and medicines. The sweet taste of lead makes water and wine more palatable, which encourages people to consume more of it, which accelerates the poisoning process. Symptoms include abdominal pain, anemia, kidney dysfunction, and nervous system damage, all of which Romans attribute to bad humors or divine displeasure rather than toxic metal consumption. Parasitic infections are universal. Intestinal worms, liver flukes, and other internal parasites infect most of the population, causing malnutrition, anemia, and digestive problems that Romans consider normal aspects of human existence. The parasites compete with their hosts for nutrients, which means that even people who eat adequate food may suffer from malnutrition. Malaria kills thousands of Romans every year, spread by mosquitoes that breed in the marshy areas around the city. Romans know that malaria is associated with swamps and bad air. That's what the name means, bad air. But they don't understand the role of mosquitoes in disease transmission. They try to avoid swampy areas when possible, but the city's location makes complete avoidance impossible. Childhood diseases like measles, mumps, rubella, and whooping cough kill enormous numbers of children before they reach adulthood. Parents expect to lose several children to disease, and they often delay naming or becoming too emotionally attached to babies until it becomes clear that the child will survive infancy. Dental disease is universal and often fatal. Without proper oral hygiene, sugar restrictions, or effective dental care, most Romans develop severe tooth decay and gum disease by early adulthood. Infected teeth can lead to abscesses that spread to the brain, causing death from what starts as a simple toothache. Women face additional health risks from pregnancy and childbirth. Without prenatal care, sterile birthing conditions, or effective medical intervention, many women die in childbirth, and many babies die during or shortly after birth. Even successful births often result in complications that affect women's health for the rest of their lives. Mental illness is poorly understood and often attributed to divine punishment or demonic possession. Depression, anxiety, and other psychological conditions are treated with bloodletting, purging, and various herbal remedies that are more likely to worsen the patient's condition than improve it. And then there are the plagues. Major epidemic diseases sweep through the Roman Empire periodically, killing enormous numbers of people and disrupting the entire social and economic system. The Antonine Plague, which may have been smallpox, killed millions of people across the empire between 165 and 180 CE. The Plague of Cyprian, possibly measles, devastated the population in the 3rd century CE. During plague years, normal life stops. Markets close, schools shut down, religious services are canceled, and people stay in their homes, hoping to avoid infection. The dead pile up faster than they can be buried, and mass graves are dug outside the city walls. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned when all the residents die or flee. The Romans have no understanding of germ theory, vaccination, or antibiotics. They don't know that diseases are caused by microorganisms, so they can't take effective steps to prevent transmission. They attribute illness to bad air, divine displeasure, or imbalanced humors, which leads to treatments that are often worse than the diseases they're meant to cure. When epidemics strike, Roman responses are based on superstition rather than science. They might hold public prayers, make sacrifices to the gods, or exile people suspected of bringing divine wrath upon the city. These measures provide psychological comfort but no medical benefit, and they often delay more practical responses like improving sanitation or quarantining the sick. The result is that disease and death are constant companions in Roman life. Everyone knows people who have died from illness, accident, or violence. Everyone expects to lose children, parents, siblings, and friends to causes that would be easily preventable or treatable with modern medicine. Life expectancy in Rome is somewhere between 25 and 35 years, depending on social class and location. If you survive childhood, which kills about half of all children born, you might live to see 50 or 60 if you're lucky and wealthy. Poor people tend to die younger from disease, malnutrition, accidents, and violence. This constant presence of death affects Roman psychology and culture in profound ways. Romans are simultaneously more casual about death and more focused on leaving behind a lasting legacy. They build monuments, write epitaphs, and create art that will outlast their mortal bodies because they know their bodies won't last very long. Roman funerary customs reflect this acceptance of death as a normal part of life. Bodies are cremated on pyres outside the city walls, and the ashes are stored in urns or scattered in gardens. Wealthy families build elaborate tombs along major roads where travelers can see their monuments and remember their names. But for most Romans, death comes without monuments or memorials. They're burned on communal pyres, and their ashes are scattered in unmarked fields. Their names are forgotten within a generation, and their lives leave no trace except in the memories of people who will also die soon. So as you go to sleep in your Roman bed, listening to the coughs and groans of your neighbors, remember that you're living in a time when death is always close. The water you drink might kill you. The food you eat might poison you. The air you breathe might infect you. The people around you might spread diseases that will end your life within days. This isn't meant to be depressing. It's meant to be realistic. Romans live with constant awareness of mortality, and this awareness shapes everything about their culture, from their religious beliefs to their social structures to their approach to daily life. Modern people live with the illusion that death is distant and preventable, that medical science can cure almost anything, and that they have plenty of time to accomplish their goals. Romans live with the knowledge that death is immediate and inevitable, that medicine is largely useless, and that they need to make their mark quickly if they want to be remembered. This creates a different kind of urgency and a different set of priorities. Romans focus on honor, duty, and reputation because these are the things that can outlast their physical existence. They build things that will endure because they know they won't endure. They create art and literature that speaks to universal human experiences because they understand how brief and fragile human life really is. Now that we've established that you're probably going to die young from disease, let's talk about how you're going to afford to live poorly while you're dying slowly. The Roman economy is simultaneously the most sophisticated financial system in the ancient world and a brutal, survival of the fittest nightmare where one bad harvest, one failed business deal, or one family emergency can destroy your life permanently. Let's start with currency. The Romans have developed a complex system of coins made from gold, silver, and bronze, with standardized weights and values that allow for trade across the entire empire. This is a genuine achievement that makes commerce possible on a scale never before seen in human history. The problem is that most people rarely see gold or silver coins because they're too valuable for everyday transactions. Your daily economic reality involves copper and bronze coins that are worth very little individually, but add up to survival if you can accumulate enough of them. A loaf of bread costs about 1 or 2 asses, which are small bronze coins. A day's wages for unskilled labor might be 4 to 8 asses, assuming you can find work, assuming the work doesn't kill you, and assuming your employer actually pays you. There's no minimum wage, no worker protection, no unemployment benefits, no disability insurance, no health coverage, and no retirement plan. If you can work, you work. If you can't work, you starve. If you get injured on the job, that's your problem. If your employer decides not to pay you, that's also your problem. and you probably don't have the money to hire a lawyer to do anything about it. The grain dole provides free bread to Roman citizens who register for it, but it's barely enough to keep you alive, and it only covers basic grain products. You still need to pay for housing, clothing, oil, wine, vegetables, and anything else that makes life tolerable. The grain dole keeps you from starving to death immediately, but it doesn't provide anything resembling a comfortable life. Most Romans work in what we would consider the informal economy. They're craftsmen, small merchants, laborers, servants, or providers of various services that may or may not be legal. There are no corporations, no employee benefits, no job security, and no career advancement opportunities. You work until you can't work anymore, and then you hope your family will take care of you, or that you'll die quickly enough to avoid becoming a burden. Slavery distorts the entire labor market. Why hire free workers when you can buy slaves who will work for nothing except food and shelter? This creates massive unemployment among the free population and drives down wages for everyone who isn't enslaved. Free workers have to compete with slave labor, which is impossible to do profitably. The result is that many free Romans live in conditions that are barely better than slavery. They're technically free, but they're economically trapped in cycles of poverty that are almost impossible to break. They have the legal right to quit their jobs and move elsewhere, but they don't have the money to actually do it, and conditions are similar everywhere in the empire. Banking exists, but it's primitive and risky. There's no deposit insurance, no regulation, and no guarantee that your banker won't disappear with your money. Interest rates are high, collateral requirements are severe, and most loans are secured by property or personal guarantees that can result in slavery if you default. The Roman tax system is regressive and brutal. The wealthy have ways to avoid or minimize their tax obligations, but ordinary citizens are taxed on everything they own, everything they earn, and everything they buy. Tax collectors are private contractors who bid for the right to collect taxes in specific regions, and they're allowed to keep whatever they collect above their bid amount. This creates powerful incentives for overtaxation and corruption. Long-distance trade is profitable but risky. Merchant ships sink in storms, caravans are attacked by bandits, and political instability can destroy commercial relationships overnight. Most merchants who try to get rich through trade end up poor or dead, but the few who succeed become enormously wealthy, which encourages more people to try. There's no social mobility for most people. If you're born poor, you'll probably die poor. If you're born a slave, you might be freed, but you'll still carry the social stigma of slavery. If you're born into a wealthy family, you'll probably stay wealthy unless you're spectacularly stupid or unlucky. The economy runs on personal relationships rather than institutions. You need patrons to get jobs, clients to provide services, and networks of family and friends to survive economic emergencies. If you don't have these relationships, or if your relationships fail, you're on your own in a system that doesn't care whether you live or die. Women have limited economic opportunities. They can't hold most jobs, can't enter into most contracts, and can't inherit property under the same terms as men. Wealthy women can influence economic decisions through their male relatives, but poor women have almost no economic power at all. The Roman economy produces enormous wealth, but most of it flows upward to a small elite, while the majority of the population struggles to survive. This isn't an accident or a temporary problem. It's how the system is designed to work. The wealthy use their money to influence politics, buy favorable laws, and maintain their advantages, while the poor compete with each other for scraps. Economic crises happen regularly. Bad harvests cause food prices to spike, which leads to riots and political instability. Wars disrupt trade and drain the treasury. Political upheavals destroy commercial relationships and create uncertainty that paralyzes business activity. When these crises occur, the wealthy weather them by using their accumulated resources, but the poor suffer catastrophically. A single bad year can destroy families that have been getting by for generations. There's no safety net, no disaster relief, and no government assistance beyond the basic grain dole. So as you count your few copper coins and try to figure out how to afford tomorrow's bread, remember that you're participating in an economic system that's simultaneously the most advanced in the ancient world and completely indifferent to your individual survival. The Roman economy is designed to create wealth for the empire and its elite, not to provide security or prosperity for ordinary citizens. You're not a valued participant in this economy. You're a resource to be exploited. And when you're no longer useful, you'll be discarded without ceremony or compensation. The only security you have is what you can create for yourself through hard work, careful saving, and the cultivation of relationships that might help you survive the next crisis. This isn't a flaw in the Roman system. It's a feature. The empire runs on the labor and sacrifice of millions of people who will never see any meaningful benefit from their contributions, and that's exactly how it's supposed to work. Let's take a moment to appreciate Roman engineering. Those magnificent aqueducts, roads, amphitheaters, and temples that still inspire awe 2,000 years later. They represent some of the greatest achievements in human history, triumphs of planning, organization, and technical skill that wouldn't be matched for centuries. They're also monuments to human suffering, built by armies of slaves, workers, and prisoners who died by the thousands to create lasting glory for an empire that considered their lives expendable. Roman roads are genuinely miraculous, straight, durable, precisely engineered highways that connected the entire empire and allowed for rapid movement of armies, goods, and information. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," exists because Roman engineers actually built roads that connected every corner of the empire to the capital, creating a transportation network that facilitated trade, governance, and cultural exchange. These roads were built by legions of workers who moved millions of tons of stone, gravel, and concrete by hand. They dug through mountains, built bridges across valleys, and carved paths through forests without any of the machinery that we consider essential for major construction projects. They used simple tools, hammers, chisels, picks, and shovels, along with ingenious techniques for moving and placing massive stones. The human cost was enormous. Workers died from accidents, exhaustion, exposure, and disease. They worked in all weather conditions, often in hostile territory, while under constant threat from local populations who weren't enthusiastic about Roman occupation. Many of the workers were slaves or prisoners of war, who had no choice in the matter and no hope of benefiting from their labor. Roman aqueducts are even more impressive. These engineering marvels carried fresh water from mountain springs across hundreds of miles, through underground tunnels, across valleys on towering arches, and into cities where they supplied fountains, baths, and private homes. The precision required to maintain the proper gradient over such distances, using only basic surveying tools, represents mathematical and engineering skill of the highest order. But again, the human cost was staggering. Digging underground aqueduct tunnels was incredibly dangerous work that killed countless laborers through cave-ins, flooding, and suffocation. The mortality rate among tunnel workers was so high that it was considered a form of execution, and condemned criminals were often sentenced to work on aqueduct construction as an alternative to immediate death. The Colosseum is perhaps the most famous example of Roman engineering, a massive amphitheater that could hold 50,000 spectators, and featured complex underground systems for elevating animals, scenery, and condemned prisoners into the arena. The engineering challenges involved in creating a structure of this size and complexity, with adequate crowd control, drainage, and acoustics, were solved with typical Roman ingenuity. Construction took about 8 years and required enormous amounts of travertine limestone, tuff, a type of volcanic rock, and brick. The materials were quarried and transported by slave labor, shaped by skilled craftsmen who were probably slaves or freedmen, and assembled by construction crews working under dangerous conditions with minimal safety precautions. Roman temples and public buildings represent the pinnacle of ancient architecture, with perfect proportions, exquisite decoration, and construction techniques that allowed them to survive earthquakes, fires, and centuries of neglect. The Pantheon in Rome, with its massive dome and innovative concrete construction, remains one of the most impressive buildings ever constructed and continues to influence architecture today. These buildings required not just manual labor but also highly skilled craftsmen, architects, engineers, sculptors, painters, and specialists in various construction techniques. Many of these craftsmen were slaves or freedmen who had been trained in specialized skills but received no personal benefit from their expertise beyond basic survival. Roman concrete was a revolutionary building material that allowed for the construction of massive domes, vaults, and arches that would have been impossible with stone alone. The formula for Roman concrete included volcanic ash that created a hydraulic cement stronger and more durable than anything else available in the ancient world. The development of this concrete required extensive experimentation with different materials and techniques, much of it conducted by workers who had no protection from the toxic effects of lime, volcanic ash, and other materials. Many concrete workers suffered from respiratory problems and skin diseases caused by exposure to caustic materials. Roman baths represent perhaps the most sophisticated plumbing and heating systems in the ancient world. Complex networks of pipes, pumps, furnaces, and drainage systems created bathing facilities that provided hot and cold water, steam rooms, and efficient waste removal for thousands of users daily. These systems required constant maintenance by workers who cleaned pipes, stoked furnaces, and repaired leaks while working in hot, humid, and often dangerous conditions. Many bath workers died from heat exhaustion, steam burns, or carbon monoxide poisoning from poorly ventilated furnace rooms. The scale of Roman engineering projects is almost incomprehensible. The city of Rome itself required constant construction and maintenance involving hundreds of thousands of workers. Streets had to be paved, sewers had to be cleaned, buildings had to be constructed and repaired, and infrastructure had to be maintained. All of this work was done without power tools, heavy machinery, or modern safety equipment. Workers lifted massive stones with pulleys and levers, moved earth with baskets and wheelbarrows, and shaped materials with hand tools. The physical demands were enormous, and the accident rates were catastrophic. Roman engineers solved problems that wouldn't be attempted again for over 1,000 years, but they solved them by throwing enormous amounts of human labor at challenges that required both technical skill and brute force. They created lasting monuments to Roman power and ingenuity, but they did it by consuming human lives on a scale that would be considered genocidal by modern standards. The paradox of Roman engineering is that it represents both the best and worst of human civilization. The technical achievements are genuinely impressive and deserve admiration. The human cost is genuinely horrific and deserves remembrance. Roman monuments are simultaneously celebrations of human capability and graveyards of human sacrifice. When you see pictures of Roman ruins or visit them as a tourist, remember that every stone was placed by someone who probably lived a short, hard life and died without recognition or reward. The glory belongs to Rome. The suffering belonged to the workers who created that glory with their blood, sweat, and lives. Up to this point, we've been assuming you're a male Roman citizen, which already puts you in a disadvantaged position compared to the wealthy elite. But what if you're a woman? Well, congratulations on drawing the short straw in the cosmic lottery of Roman social hierarchy. Being a woman in ancient Rome means experiencing all the hardships of Roman life while also dealing with legal, social, and economic restrictions designed to ensure you never have any real power over your own existence. Let's start with the legal reality. Roman women exist in a state of permanent legal guardianship called tutela. This means that at every stage of your life, some man has legal authority over your decisions, your property, and your person. As a child, you're under your father's authority. When you marry, that authority transfers to your husband. If you're widowed or divorced, it might transfer to a male relative or even to a court-appointed guardian. You cannot vote, hold public office, serve in the military, or represent yourself in legal proceedings. You cannot make contracts, buy or sell property, or conduct business without male approval. You can't even make a will without permission from your guardian. And your guardian can revoke that permission at any time. Marriage for Roman women isn't about love, companionship, or personal fulfillment. It's a business transaction designed to create political alliances and transfer property between families. You have virtually no say in whom you marry, when you marry, or under what conditions. Your father chooses your husband based on political and economic considerations, and your opinion is irrelevant. Most Roman women are married by age 14 or 15, often to men who are significantly older. You might be engaged as a child and married before you're physically or emotionally ready for the responsibilities of adult life. Your wedding is a public ceremony that celebrates the union between two families, not the beginning of your personal happiness. Once married, Your primary function is to produce male heirs to continue your husband's family line. Your value as a wife is measured primarily by your fertility and your ability to give birth to sons. If you fail to conceive, if you have miscarriages, or if you only produce daughters, this is considered your fault, and it may be grounds for divorce. Pregnancy and childbirth in ancient Rome are extremely dangerous. There's no prenatal care, no understanding of proper nutrition during pregnancy, no sterile birthing conditions, and no effective medical intervention when complications arise. Many women die in childbirth, and many babies die during birth or in infancy. If you survive childbirth, you might face years of repeated pregnancies as you try to produce the male heirs your husband's family demands. Contraception exists, but is primitive and unreliable, consisting mainly of various herbal preparations and physical barriers that may or may not be effective. Many women spend most of their adult lives either pregnant or recovering from childbirth. Your education, if you receive any, is limited to domestic skills and basic literacy. Wealthy women might learn to read and write, but higher education in philosophy, rhetoric, or law is reserved for men. You're expected to be knowledgeable enough to manage a household, but not educated enough to challenge male authority or participate in public discourse. Economic opportunities for women are severely limited. You can't hold most jobs, can't enter into business partnerships, and can't inherit property on the same terms as men. If you're wealthy, you might influence economic decisions through your male relatives, but you have no direct control over your own financial resources. If you're poor, your options are even more restricted. You might work as a servant, seamstress, midwife, or in other occupations considered appropriate for women, but these jobs pay very little and offer no security or advancement opportunities. Many poor women turn to prostitution, which is legal but socially stigmatizing and physically dangerous. Divorce is possible, but it's much easier for men to divorce women than the reverse. Your husband can divorce you for adultery, sterility, or even for behavior he considers inappropriate. You can seek divorce, but only under very specific circumstances, and you'll likely face social ostracism and economic hardship if you succeed. If you're divorced or widowed, you might have slightly more freedom than married women, but you also face significant challenges. You may have limited financial resources, few economic opportunities, and social pressure to remarry quickly. Unmarried women are viewed with suspicion and often assumed to be sexually promiscuous or morally corrupt. Child custody laws strongly favor fathers. Children belong to their father's family, not their mother's, and if your marriage ends, your children will probably stay with their father or his relatives. You might have limited or no contact with your own children after divorce or your husband's death. The double standard regarding sexual behavior is extreme. Men are expected to be sexually active and are praised for their conquests. Women are expected to be chaste before marriage and faithful afterward, and any deviation from this standard can result in severe punishment, including divorce, social ostracism, or even death. Roman religious practices often reinforce women's subordinate status. Many religious roles are reserved for men, and women's participation in religion is often limited to domestic rituals or cults, specifically designed for female participation. Even when women serve as priestesses, they're usually under the authority of male religious officials. Despite all these restrictions, some Roman women do achieve prominence and influence. Wealthy women can wield significant behind-the-scenes power through their relationships with powerful men. Some women become successful businesswomen, poets, or patrons of the arts. A few even influence political decisions through their family connections. But these exceptional women succeed despite the system, not because of it. For every Livia who influences imperial policy, or Sulpicia who writes acclaimed poetry, there are thousands of women who live their entire lives under male control, bearing children, managing households, and dying in obscurity. The irony is that Roman civilization depends entirely on women's labor and sacrifice. Women produce and raise the next generation of Romans, manage complex households that support male careers, and provide essential economic services that keep the empire functioning. But this vital contribution is largely invisible and completely unrewarded. Roman women are expected to be strong enough to survive childbirth, intelligent enough to manage households, and resilient enough to endure whatever hardships life brings, but they're also expected to remain subordinate, silent, and grateful for whatever protections and privileges men choose to provide. So if you're a woman in ancient Rome, remember that your challenges aren't just the physical hardships of daily life, the constant threat of disease and death, or the brutal realities of Roman politics and economics. You also have to navigate a social system specifically designed to limit your options, control your behavior, and ensure that your life serves male interests rather than your own aspirations. This doesn't mean that Roman women are passive victims. Many find ways to exercise agency within the constraints they face, developing networks of female friendship and support, using religious participation as a form of social engagement, and finding creative ways to influence decisions that affect their lives. But the fundamental reality remains. In ancient Rome, being born female means accepting a lifetime of restrictions that will limit your opportunities, control your choices, and subordinate your interests to those of the men around you. It's survival on hard mode, with extra obstacles and fewer rewards.